We don't have a free market, don't kid yourself. The two biggest enemies of the free market are two separate groups, my academic colleagues and business people. Business people are enemies of free markets, not friends. The academic people are all in favor of freedom for themselves, except even now they aren't even in favor of that with this politically correct nonsense that's going around. But historically, academic people have always been in favor of freedom for themselves. They want to be able to say what they want, write what they want, do whatever research they want. But they're all against freedom for everybody else. They think that they know better what's good for the poor people than the poor people do. They think they can run the economy better than the businesses can. The business people are just the opposite. They're all in favor of freedom for everybody else. And at the drop of a hat, you can get any leading businessman to give you an eloquent speech on the virtues of free market. But when it comes to their own business, they want to go down to Washington and get a special tariff to protect their business. They want a special tax deduction. They want a tax subsidy. When Chrysler's on the verge of failing, which it should have done, it should have been allowed to fail, Chrysler goes down and exercises political influence to try to get the government to lend it money to subsidize it. So businessmen in general, not all, there have been some notable exceptions, and I don't want to include everybody, just as not all intellectuals are in that class. But in the main, most businessmen are enemies of free markets. The real beneficiaries of free markets are the invisible man, the consumer, the ordinary worker. Those are the real people who benefit from free markets. But unfortunately, they don't have the kind of political clout that PAC, Political Action Committee from Big Business, has. One of the great economists of the 19th century was Alfred Marshall. And he has as a sort of motto for one of his books, the seen and the unseen. And it's a marvelous motto for this. What happens in economics over and over again is that there are two sets of effects of any action. The immediately visible effects and the widespread invisible effects. And the widespread invisible effects are often much more important than the visible ones. But people don't see them. Let me give you very simple examples. We have a quota on the amount of sugar that can be imported from various countries. The visible effect of that is that there are about a couple of 100,000 growers of beet sugar who benefit greatly from it, who are able to keep on growing beet sugar. They don't benefit so greatly because most of the money goes into paying the expenses of growing the beets. And indeed, if there were no such quota, they would find something else to do. But who believe, in the short run, the visible effect is that they are able to have a market they would otherwise not have. The invisible effect is that every consumer in the United States pays twice as much for the sugar he or she buys as the world price. Now, you're a consumer. How much attention do you pay to the fact that you pay twice as much for sugar as you ought to? Is the fact that you pay twice as much for sugar as you ought to going to lead you to go down to Washington to testify against the sugar quota? But are the beet sugar farmers going to go down to Washington to testify in favor of the sugar quota? It's a typical example of the seen versus the unseen, the concentrated visible versus the dispersed invisible. And the major reason why roughly half the income of this country is controlled by governmental agencies instead of by the people who earn it is because of this contrast between the visible and the invisible. We talk about about a majority government. It is a majority government, but it's a very funny kind of a majority. It's a majority made up of a whole bunch of minorities. You've got 1/10 of 1% of the people who are beet sugar growers. They're part of this majority. You've got another 0.2%, maybe 1 or 2% of the people who are in the textile industry, and they make us pay twice the world price for shirts and for other things because of textile tariffs and textile agreement around the world. And so down the line, you got all these specialists, you got labor unions, you got these and those. Each one separately is a little minority. But they all get together. Each minority is more interested in its own little problem than in what happens for the rest of the country, and so it's willing to give its vote to the other things. If they'll give it, it's a case of log rolling. So what we have is a log rolling majority in which the majority of the people are not in fact represented. Is there any doubt in your mind? Suppose you were able to get an effective poll from the people at large on this question. The government imposes quotas on the import of sugar. The result of that is that X thousand farmers are able to grow beet sugar who otherwise would not, and that you are paying twice the world price for sugar. Are you in favor of this? Is there any doubt in your mind that a majority would say they're opposed to it? If a private organization makes a mistake, does things badly, it will lose money and it will have to go out of business. If a public organization does things badly, and governmental organization does things badly and makes bad mistakes, it will be expanded. It will be expanded because they'll say, well, it's all because we just didn't have enough resources to it, or else it will be left to stand, and another organization will be set up to do what it was supposed to do. The problem with government is not in the things it tries, but in the absence of any mechanism for recognizing error. What you need, what the private system abounds in, is survival of the fittest. What the governmental system abounds in is expansion of the mistakes. And there's no mechanism for eliminating governmental agencies which either have no longer are needed or have behaved perversely.